I was looking at them, and it reminded me of Christmas as I was growing up. I remember growing up and how gifts under the tree was just one of the most mesmerizing, captivating things ever. And you have to understand the context for gifts under the tree as I was growing up. A lot of our Christmases we did in a small little town in the center of the country, which was really very much in the middle of nowhere, but my grandfather had this big old house there, and within this big old house was one big old room that was the most fancy, best looking room in the entire house, but nobody ever went there. Okay, it was the formal living room. Okay, and this formal living room, when it was Christmas time, it had this big tree. Okay, and the tree, I'm pretty sure, wasn't as big as I remember it, but as I remember it, it was the biggest tree in the world. I've never again seen such a big tree with so many lights that was that pretty. And I remember as a kid, I would look at this tree and look at these gifts, and the expectation that the gifts would create in me the feeling of when am I going to get to open these gifts. And we would count the days. It was before the days like today where you can get a Star Wars nativity, the whole thing where you can count down and get a little Star Wars figure. We had none of that. Okay, so we were just counting the days before Christmas. I remember one year we made little things where we stuck one paper on top of another, and we had little windows, and you could see another picture every day. Come on, Star Wars Lego, little picture every day. I grew up in the wrong time, clearly, okay? But I remember how we were counting down the days before Christmas. How many days until Christmas? How many days until we get there? So when Ethan was asking me yesterday, how many days until Christmas? I remembered that was the question we always asked. Now, this morning, I don't want to speak to you about the days until Christmas. I want to speak to you about the years before Christmas, because the whole Christmas story didn't take days to set up. This moment wasn't just a matter of days, it was a matter of years. In fact, it was not a matter of a couple of years. There's a 4,000-year setup to the Christmas story, and I'm going to do my best to take you through 4,000 years of setup and 66 books of the Bible in 25 minutes. And this is the part where you say good luck or yeah right. I don't know which one of those two it's going to be, but long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Oh, no, hold on. That's another story. Okay. The fact of the matter is that there was this preparation to Christmas. Christmas was set up. Now, you thought you prepare a lot for Christmas. I had to go do Christmas menu shopping yesterday. Okay. Anybody else? No, just me? That is a terrible idea. Because apparently all of Austin decided to do Christmas menu shopping yesterday, right? So we got the whole menu, and I mean, we never planned this far in advance, but it's Christmas, right? I spoke to my mom. She flew in a couple of days ago. I spoke to her about 2 weeks ago. She said, well, she's all packed and ready to come, and it was like a week to go. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? We prepare for these things. We get it ready. Well, God was preparing the moment Jesus was born for 4,000 years. All of history is a preparation for that one single moment. And I'm gonna simplify it a little bit by giving you 5 stages, 5 hooks to hang all that I say onto this morning. And here's the 5 stages real quickly, okay? So if you go through the timeline, it starts with a promise, it goes to a people, it goes to a place, and then there's persistence, and it ends with postponement, okay? And that's a lot of P's, I know, okay? But just hang with me, okay? So the story goes, and it starts off with God creates, and then there's the fall, that moment when we fall from grace, when we fall from relationship with God, and the fall happens, and then God calls a nation, a people together, and He takes this nation or people, and they violate God's principles. They decide against God, and they end up living a life in exile outside of the place that He has given them. And when they live a life outside of the place that He has given them, God is persistent with regards to His promise, and He brings them back to this place that He had in mind for them. They return, and then it ends with 400 years of silence. And that essentially, I don't need 25 minutes. That's it. It's done. That was 66 books of the Bible just there, okay? We can go home. You can stop looking at the gorilla and wondering what he's saying, okay? That's essentially it. That's the setup. But I believe hidden in the setup, hidden in the story are moments that speaks to our expectation of Christmas. There's in the setup, in the context that God created for the moment that Jesus was born, I believe He's hidden some particular things that addresses some of the needs, some of the desires we have. And my expectation today is that the context will amplify your experience of the moment. So much of Christmas is about the moment Christ was born, right? We sing the songs, we do the plays, we watch endless amounts of plays. I was just thinking this morning, where's Ross? Ross and Cheyenne had their 5th kid this week. How exciting is that? I mean, talk about church growth, right? That's commitment. Anybody with less than 5 kids, you're not as committed as they are, okay? So you've got to work on it. But I was just thinking, buddy, do you know how many nativity scenes you're going to see with 5 kids going through primary school? And that's a lot of commitment right there. But it's all about the moment, right? All these things are about the moment of the birth of Christ. But without the context, I believe a lot of it is missing. I think even when we read the biblical accounts of the birth of Christ, if we don't understand the context of that moment, we're missing half of the beauty thereof. And my prayer this morning, my desire is that God will come and elevate your expectation, and He will come and meet your desires by connecting you to the context of the story of the birth of Christ. So let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God comes and He creates heaven and earth. And the fact of the matter is that when He creates heaven and earth, He makes Adam and Eve. And I guess there's something to be said about the creation. Have you ever noticed that all questions are not created equally? Different questions are at different heights. The what question is one of the lowest levels of questions that we can ask, right? When we ask what, it's a low level of question. The higher question than what is the how question. That's when we actually start getting into it. But the highest level of question is the why question in life, right? So all questions are not created equally. And when it comes to creation, the questions are not created equally. A lot of people get stuck on the what. What did God create and what was the detail around it? But then they get into the how. And I'm not going to get into the how because then I'm not going to be done in 25 minutes. But then there's a how did God create? But the highest level of question with regards to creation is not the what, nor is it the how. The highest level of question is the why. Have you ever answered the why question with regards to creation? Why does God create? Because you can't say God needed to create. There's not a need in God to create anything because the Bible is clear. God has no needs. So why go to the trouble of creating if you're a God with no needs? Why does God create? Well, why God creates informs every part of this story all the way through to the moment Jesus came to earth. Why God created was because God is love, and out of an abundance of love, God gave all of creation. The love boiled over and creation was the result. That's why God created. That's why He creates human beings with the understanding that human beings will choose against His love plan. Why does He not just take away our ability to choose? Well, because if He takes away choice, He takes away love, and the very nature of God is love, so He can't take that away. So He gives us the choice and we choose against Him, and that's the fall. The fall is the moment where we say, we're glad you love us, but we're going to do this our way. We're going to choose not to love you back. And that's the moment it all comes crashing down. The whole reason for all of creation, the whole expanse of the universe, is God's desire to have a love relationship with humanity. And humanity chooses against that relationship. And it all comes crashing down in a great big fall. And if you read the story of the fall, you probably, if you've been around church, you've heard a lot about the fall, and you probably heard a lot about the curse that was there because of the fall and how everything fell apart because of the fall. But we miss the most important part of the fall. The most important part of the fall of humanity is the moment when God comes and He makes the promise. See, because as soon as it happens, we've just had the story. Genesis 3 verse 15 comes along, and in the middle of this curse about what sin has done and how sin will break the world, God comes and he makes this statement. He says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. God's speaking to the snake. He says, I will put enmity or fighting between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Okay, it's a little poetic, I know. It's a little out there, but within the context, which you've got to understand, this is part of the poem that the Israelites for thousands of years would remember the fall over, and the prophecy or the moment here is the first prophecy that God makes. It's the first promise God makes. It's just happened. Mankind has just chosen to not follow God, to go it their own way, and they respond. They come back, and this is what he says. He says, I will come, and through your seed, the seed of the woman, I will bring forth someone that will save you. That S that is capitalized there is not a mistake. It is the way it is written in the Bible. That seed refers to capital S seed. It refers to the seed of the woman, the child of Mary, that will crush his head and that will deal with sin once and for all. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whomsoever believe in him shall be saved. John chapter 3 verse 16 is the result, is the fulfillment of the promise in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15. And that's the beauty of the story, is that the story is promised right at the beginning. God says, I'm going to bring about solution. I'm going to bring about fullness. I'm going to bring about life in this matter. It's the beginning of the 4,000 year setup. Before God made humanity, he chose to sacrifice Jesus on our behalf. He was not caught off guard by our disobedience. It was a choice he made beforehand. I mean, I love maybe just one more thing about this moment, and I can get lost in it. But there's what's the first thing God says when the crisis happens, when Adam and Eve messes it all up, the entire plan. And now, just for a moment, consider this. I mean, you know what words come out of your mouth when you've set up the entire, you've did the table, you did the tree, the whole thing. My brother sent me a picture that they've got a small little tree this year, and it's up high on a table. And the caption was, Christmas with toddlers. Okay? Fact of the matter is, you've got to elevate it. Why? Because they're going to pull it down. It's going to be a mess. Now, if you did all the trouble to set it all up and somebody messes it up, I know what words would come out of my mouth. Fact of the matter is that God creates all of the expanse of the universe, plants, animals, the whole deal, places humanity right there, and then what happens is humanity messes up the plans. What's the first thing God says? Well, humanity's expecting it, right? So if you read the story, they cover up with leaves because they realized they were naked, and what did? They hide from God. What's God's response? Come over here, I'm going to deal with this when your dad comes home. No, none of that. Here's his response. The first word from God after the fall is, where are you? It's the refrain that echoes throughout history. God's desire is to be with us. God cannot believe that you would hide from him. This is the point of the whole story of Jesus. This is the Christmas message. The Christmas message is God saying, where are you? I want to have a relationship with you. I want to know you. Maybe you need to hear those words today. Maybe you've drifted off. Maybe you find yourself in a space where you've drifted from your relationship with God, or you feel like you're at a distance to God. You feel like you're hiding from him. I want to tell you that his heart, his posture towards you hasn't changed one bit. The next 4,000 years of setup will be a refrain of these words. Where are you? For God so loved the world that he gave his Son. For God so loved you. Because of the love of God that we're having a Christmas conversation. It's the whole point. Any case, so we've got a lot of history to get through, okay? So that's pretty much the first couple of chapters of Genesis, right? We've worked our way through the fall. God is looking for mankind, and then the story goes on, and God actually calls, and Abraham, he calls together a people, right? So it's still in the book of Genesis, but he calls together this nation, this people around which a lot of the Old Testament will revolve. And under Abraham, he says, Abraham, I want you to go to this place that I will show you, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to give you a land. So that's basically the two promises God makes repeatedly to Abraham. He says there's going to be many descendants, and I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to make a community out of you. I'm going to make a tribe out of you. I'm going to bring you together. In Exodus chapter 6, verse 7 is one of the first times we find a refrain that we'll find again and again through the Old Testament. It says, I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. See, God brings together a people. He brings together a tribe. A friend of mine in India, and the Indians are an incredible nation of people, but it's a nation with a whole lot of tribes and classes and things. And he made a statement the other day which really struck me. He said this, he said, find your tribe and you'll find your calling. Find your tribe and you'll find your calling. Everybody's looking for a tribe. Everybody's looking for a place where I can be at home, where I can belong. And when God calls together a people, this is part of what he does. When he sets up the birth of Jesus Christ, he sets up a people. He says, you're going to be a community together. And Jesus came so that we might belong to the family of God. Now, at some point, the psalmist reflects on this, and he says he came to put the lonely in families. We live in a day and age where people are more connected than ever, but they're lonelier than ever. And there's few times in the year that loneliness is as amplified as this time of the year. But part of what Jesus came for was to say, hey, I want to make you part of a people. I want to take orphans and make them part of a family. I want to put you together. I want to bring you together as a people, as a nation. But then the story goes on, and it's interesting as you go through Exodus. God takes them to the promised land. They've got 40 years in the desert because they don't believe God. After 40 years in the desert through Joshua, next book in the Bible, he brings them back together. They conquer the promised land. Then they kind of miss the plot. It's the time of the Judges, next book in the Bible. And then comes the king. God raises up the kings. Initially, Samuel reigns, 2 books of Samuel, then the Kings and the Chronicles of the Kings that kind of overlap that, and then comes in a couple of prophets as the people start disobeying God, and God warns the people, and he says, listen, this land, this people, this promise that I'm preparing, you guys are disobeying me, you guys aren't following me, you're following after other gods, you're going to lose this privilege if you keep on doing this, okay? So the whole idea of a people then comes to the next phase, which is essentially the fact that these people then get pulled from their place as they go into exile. So God allows other nations to come and conquer them and take them over. End of the book of Jeremiah, end of 2 Kings, right? Okay, we're doing well, guys. We're about halfway through, okay? So it's at this point in time that God allows them to go into exile, and suddenly the small little nation gets conquered by the big nations. First the Assyrians take the northern kingdom, then the Babylonians take the southern kingdom, and then the Assyrians. And what we find at this point in history is that there's a whole bunch of Middle Eastern nations that existed before this point that just disappears off the map because they just swallowed in by these huge mega nations that just take them over. And they just assimilate into their culture and they just keep going. But can I tell you something? Not the people of God. Because God has an eternal plan and purpose that he holds on to and that he takes them through. And God has a desire to take people into a greater life than what they've lived. So they go into these foreign countries, they go to Babylon, and you've heard the story, but in this space, God says, I've called you to this space to be the light. I've called you pray for the peace of Babylon. Pray for the peace of this space. I want to use you in this space. God sets them up because even though physically they are in a narrow place, God has a broad place in mind for them. One of the Psalms written around this is a word of prayer, a word of prophecy. In Psalm 18 verse 19, it says, he brought me out into a broad place. See, God's desire is to put you into a broad place. And the sense that I got as I was praying about this is that sometimes we allow the smallness of the world we live in to enter into our thinking. We allow the smallness of the world we live in to enter into our livings, and we end up living a life like somebody that's got a jacket on that's too small. Have you ever tried on a jacket? Let's not say that you've grown. Let's just say that you've borrowed it from someone else, okay? You've borrowed someone else's jacket that is a little too small for you. Have you ever felt the constraint of a jacket that is too small for you? I'm not referring to the one that you might have worn before that doesn't fit anymore. That's not relevant. This is Christmas. It's a happy time. Fact of the matter is that jacket, that constraint, it feels like you can't move, you can't do anything. And I think sometimes we allow that thinking. And if you read the story in the exile, if you listen to the prophets Isaiah and others prophesying to the people of God, it's God saying, hey, I've got a huge, big life for you. I've got a wide open space for you. I haven't put these restraints on you. I am bigger than this. And then God comes along, and if you continue to read the story, you'll find in the books of Esther and the books of Nehemiah and the books of Ezra and these different books, how God actually restores his people back to the land, because God says, you might be a small little nation in the middle of nowhere that's been taken over by several large, huge nations that have since been taken by other huge nations, but I've got a global mega plan that's bigger than any plan on the planet. It's the story of humanity, and you're a part of it. So I'm going to save you as a nation. God speaks to a king in the night, and he sends them back to Jerusalem. Why? Because God is busy with a setup for a moment that's taken him 4,000 years to set up. And it's in these moments that he repeats, and he says it again, and he repeats it again, that he has a promise and he has a plan, and God returns them because God is persistent about his ideas. And God's plans will prosper. I was thinking of this the last couple of days, and I was just taken up with how hard it must be to be an atheist. I mean, there's historical evidence of all these things. It doesn't make any sense that there would even be a nation, that there would even be a Bethlehem of the tribe the tribe of Benjamin, where the Christ would be born at the time that it happened. It shouldn't even have been, if you look at history. And yet God is orchestrating all of this because God's plan is bigger than people's perceptions. And I was working this out, and I was working the date, 4,000 years. How do we even know that it's 4,000 years? But you know those irritating genealogies in the Bible? Is it just me? With all the names you can't pronounce? Okay? The son of this, which is the son of that, which is the son of who cares, which is the son of why am I reading this, which is the son of what's going on. Well, every time you read through one of those, you remember that this is God making clear the setup, that we can trace the line of Christ from Adam to Jesus. And that's pretty impressive. 4,000 years without Google, and they're able to do that. That's incredible. Fact of the matter is, that's why those genealogies are in there, because God's making us aware of his setup, which he's persistent about. But sometimes we find ourselves in places where we're going through hard times, where we're living in a bit of an exile space, where things aren't working out the way we think they should. And then we think, well, this is the worst. I can never get through this. If God could get his plan and purpose through what he got his plan and purpose through, he can get you through what you're facing. In fact, that's what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. He says, the temptation in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than what you can stand. When you are tempted, when you're in a tough space, when you're in a storm, he will show you the way out, so that you can endure. There is always a way out. If there's something that is clear by the birth of Christ, is that there is always a way out. God always finds a way. Number 5 is, it's interesting as you read the story, how the story of these 4,000 years of history ends. See, because as they come back, they rebuild Nehemiah, all those different books, Ezra, the story goes, and then comes a couple of the so-called minor prophets come in, Malachi and others, and they prophesy different things to the people of God. And then there is a moment 400 years before the birth of Christ, that it all goes quiet. 66 books, 3,600 years of history ends with these words. It ends with Malachi 4, verse 4 to 6. Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. So remember what was said. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and strike them to the earth with a curse. If I wasn't trying to do this in 25 minutes, I'd go and show you how these last couple of verses of 66 books essentially summarizes the story throughout, and how every one of these moments has been a setup to this moment, that God would turn the hearts of the fathers to the sons and the sons to the fathers. You see, God's sons and daughters, the children of God, the people of God that chose against him in the curse, he was about to restore it. He makes this final statement, and for 400 years, that's 10 generations. That's like your father's father, that hasn't heard anything. And yet you believe. The story ends with 400 years of anticipation. The last 10% of the 4,000 years is spent waiting, believing, trusting. See, one of the things is, if we look at the story as a whole, Aaron, you can go to the next slide, but if we look at the story as a whole, we're looking at it the way you look at mountains from a distance. Have you ever seen a mountain range from a distance? If you've driven through some form of plateau and it's flat and you can see until tomorrow and it's beautiful. But then you drive up to this mountain range and in the distance you can see the mountains. But when you look at the mountains looks like one flat set of mountains. And the problem is we look back at the 4,000 years as one flat set of mountains. And we're looking at this and we're going, oh, great. It was Jesus came. That's fantastic. And then we look at this flat set of mountains and suddenly we go through our own hills and valleys in life. And when we're going through our own hills and valleys, there's hills, mountaintop experiences, and valleys in between, and then more hills, and it's ups and downs. And suddenly we say, well, the Bible is irrelevant. It just says all kumbaya and beautiful, and it all just happened. It didn't all just happen. There were hills, there were valleys, there were differences between promises made and promises fulfilled. There was time in there where people had to grab a hold of the presence and the promise of God and say, God, you said, and I will not let go of that until your persistence pays off. And when we live life, we need to remember in those moments that there were these times of 400 years of silence. And there are times in our life when it's silent. And it doesn't just all happen for us. But that doesn't change the fact that God is faithful. And the God that has done it before will do it again. The God that has done it before will do it again. He's able. The birth of Christ comes and it addresses every one of those things that we desire, every one of our needs. And actually, if you look at the birth of Christ through the lens of the context of the birth of Christ, through the lens of the 4,000 years of setup, what you'll notice is that this addresses our need for a Savior. See, we all need a Savior. And the fact of the matter is that the setup addresses the need that we have to be saved, to be set free. It addresses our need for community, our need for family, our need for being together. It addresses our need for room. It addresses our need for a calling. And I'm trusting God that this Christmas, something of the bigger plan of God over your life than the life that you're living will break through into your heart, and that you will drop that jacket that is too small and you will put on the jacket that He has in mind for you. That you will elevate your thinking to His level of thinking. God that put together that entire 4,000 years of human history for one moment, for one baby that would forever change everything, is the same God that dreamt about your life before you were. And He has a plan and a purpose for your life, and He will be persistent about it if only you would believe Him. And my prayer is that we would realize that the room we need is found in God. He addresses our need for a way out. Maybe you need a way out. God's got a way out ready for you, and He addresses our need for His nearness. And if you're finding yourself in a space of distance, in a space of silence, I want to tell you that His desire is to be near you. Context is everything. We can never really understand anything without understanding its context. Somebody said this. They said that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then context is worth 1,000,000. This is the context of the story, of the moment that we celebrate when we celebrate Christmas. And I want to take a moment as I wrap this up and just read you a little bit of the Christmas story. This little bit of the Christmas story you've probably read, and it's been read to you before you could even read. But this is a little bit of the Christmas story. And when we read this little bit of the Christmas story, I want you for a moment to take all those nativity scenes that you have seen, those that Ross will see a lot of. Take those nativity scenes and put them aside for a moment. And just allow God to show you this within the context of the 4,000 years of setup. Matthew chapter 2 from verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. I was accused a couple of weeks ago of being the Grinch that stole Christmas because I might have highlighted one or two irregularities in the Christmas narrative. I'm careful to say this, but this verse starts with after Jesus was born. We're about to read about wise men that came to see Him, but it starts with His birth had already happened. So it might or might not be that wise men were in the crib with the shepherds, and just saying, read the verse. Don't worry about it. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, that's it, right? After Jesus was born in the days of King Herod, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Just another note. It doesn't say necessarily 3 wise men. Just kind of leaving it there with you to do with what you like. It does mention 3 gifts later, but there wasn't necessarily 3. In fact, if they came from the east to Jerusalem, if there were 3, they would be dead, especially if they had gold with them, because somebody would have killed them. So just saying, just leaving it with you, do with it, use it, don't use it, it's really up to you. Saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? I think that's past tense, I'm not sure. King of the Jews, for we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. Okay, that word troubled there, the Greek word used there is to stir something up, to disturb what is quiet. So it's like the quiet waters were suddenly troubled and all Jerusalem with him. Why is all Jerusalem troubled at the knowing of the king? Because for 4,000 years, this is all anybody has spoken about. For 4,000 years, the birth of this son was the resolution of the fall. It was the epitome of the people. It was the plan of the place. It was the reason for God's persistence to bring his people back. And this boy that was born was what the last 400 years of waiting has been all about of God's setup. The whole city is stirred up about this. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Of course they knew where the Christ was to be born. For 4,000 years, this was the point of the whole story. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least amongst the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I might come and worship him also. The king of the nation's primary concern is the birth of a baby. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where a young child, where a young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. This is the part with all that context that I leave you hanging. To be continued on Tuesday evening when we're together again. But before we do that, I wonder if, and Philip, if you don't mind joining me, but I wonder if something of the Christmas story, something of the point, something of the context around the life of Christ isn't relevant to some people here this morning. I'm wondering if there aren't people in need of nearness, in need of a way out, in need of room, new vision, new purpose, new perspective, in need of community, or in need of a Savior this morning amongst us. I wonder if we can't close this conversation today, not just with looking back at history and looking back at the context of the moment, but I'm wondering if we can't close this morning by just for a moment taking ourselves and asking the question about our lives and the relevance of the story to us. Christ came so that the world may be saved. But Christ came that whomsoever believes in him. And maybe this morning you need to remember that you're a whomsoever. You're somebody God had in mind when the carpet was pulled out from under them. And the whole reason of the universe was hanging in the balance. And God was walking in the garden and he said, where are you? Maybe this morning you need to remember that where are you was there with you in mind when God made this nation and he told Abraham that you will have many sons, Father Abraham. When he said that, when he showed him the stars and he asked him to count the sand on the seashore, one of those grains of sand and one of those stars in the sky represented you. It was God's desire. When he gave them this place, the promised land, he He knew that he was setting something up in that space which would one day make space for you. And when the plan was under threat, and he moved kings and kingdoms into place to save it, he saved it because he had you in mind, because he knew that one day your heart as his child will be turned towards the Father, and the Father's heart will be turned towards his children. And one day, a son would be born. And our salvation, our nearness of God, our lives will be hidden away in him. And maybe you need to celebrate that this morning. Lord, you know every heart. You know every mind. You know every perspective of every person that is represented here this morning. God, I thank you that as you set up the birth of Christ, you've set up our lives with dreams and ideas and visions and plans in mind. Lord, my prayer is that people will find this day nearness. They will find this day a way out. They will find this day room. They will find this day community and family. They will find this day salvation in your Son, the Son born unto us. In Jesus' name.